Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in our first edition of our Investment and Finance Masterclass, powered by Afriinvest and Emerging Africa Capital. My name is Ada Ijara, and I'm the Group Head, Wealth Management at the Emerging Africa Capital Group, and I'm so delighted to be moderating this session. Today, we'll be discussing a topic, reopening the economy, where are the opportunities? And we're so delighted that so many of you could actually have registered. I'm pleased to announce that we have over 1,000 registered participants even at this time. So thank you so much for joining in. Now, COVID-19 has been the bane of our collective existence since the beginning of this year, and the world is still reeling from the changes to life as we know it. Now, this morning I have two powerhouses in the house to discuss this topic, and they'll be sharing their deep insights regarding this topic. Okay, our first speaker is Mr. IF Masterclass. Now, he's a Group Managing Director of Afriinvest West Africa, which is a leading wealth advisory firm with a focus on West Africa. Afriinvest is active in 4 principal areas: investment banking, securities trading, asset management, and investment research. He has over 30 years of financial advisory experience involving strategic advisory in corporate finance, including mergers and acquisitions, projects, structured finance, debt and equity capital market activities. His industry specializations include the telecommunications, media, financial services, and general industrial sectors. His professional experience cuts across renowned financial institutions, including Arthur Andersen, Goldman Sachs, and Salomon Smith Barney Incorporated. Please join me in welcoming IF Masterclass to the house.
Thank you for that heartwarming introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Our second speaker today is Tony Soni, and she's the Group Chief Executive Officer at Emerging Africa Capital Group. It's a leading African provider of investment banking, trusts, wealth advisory, and asset management services, offering capital solutions to institutional and private clients. Tony has over 30 years experience in finance, capital markets, law and investor services, and has played leading roles in major funding transactions. She's an astute business leader, and she was declared the CEO of the Year in Nigeria, as well as the All-Africa Businesswoman of the Year, both in 2017, amongst several other accomplishments. Please join me in welcoming Tony to the house. Thank you, Tony, for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Ada. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to a lively exchange with you all this morning.
Fantastic. Okay, so to the business of the day. I have here with on the screen the outline for today's presentation. Sections 1 and 2, which will basically cover COVID-19 and the impact on the global economy, as well as the implications for the Nigerian economy, will be taken through those slides by Ike. Tony will then come in to take us through section 3, which is living with COVID-19, the new normal. Ike will then be back to also now discuss opportunities for investments, for governments rather, and opportunities for businesses. And then Tony will then come back to take section 6, which is opportunities for individuals and investors. After that, we'll then take the Q&A, and I'll encourage you to please upload your questions on the Q&A box just at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and take as many of them as we can. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to a wonderful session with you all. Thank you. So Ike, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Ada. And then good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ada, can you go to full screen mode on your computer, please?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Click on the presentation icon at the bottom there. Thank you.
That's what Jordan.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Again, I'm delighted to be here to talk about reopening the economy and where the opportunities might lie. And this section on the impact of COVID-19 on the global economy. Next slide, please. Ada, next slide.
Yes, I'm on the next slide, sir.
Okay, thanks. There's a bit of a delay. You can see the impact of COVID-19 globally from an overview perspective, with over 5.3 million cases and over 340,000 deaths at last counting. In Africa, we have over 80,000 cases and at present just over 3,000 deaths. The impact in Africa has not been as large as what we've seen in most of the developed economies. China, where coronavirus started, has actually witnessed a muted impact relative to the rest of Asia, I would say, and of course, Europe and North America. Next slide. Well, what the first effect that the pandemic has caused is the disruption of the global supply chain. If you look at what has happened in Europe, which accounts for 16% of world GDP and 37% of world merchandise trade, it actually has effectively locked down the system of movement of goods and services. The United States has also been severely impacted. They contribute 15% of world GDP and 11% of merchandise trade. Similarly, in China, which contributes 19% of GDP and 12% of merchandise trade. And you can see from these three regions, as a consequence of COVID-19, the rest of the world have had to suffer severely, while we're also trying to protect our own lives and livelihoods as a result. Next slide. The effect has been what has been unprecedented. At the beginning of 2020, Afriinvest and similar to other houses had lofty expectations of what GDP growth will be for Nigeria and the rest of Africa and the world. But today, we are faced with the calamity that COVID-19 has wrought on the world, where you see a synchronized contraction. The world GDP is expected to contract by 3% in 2020. If you look at advanced economies, the contraction is as high as 6%. In the Eurozone, it's 7.5% contraction. Amongst emerging markets and developing economies, it's less severe. It's only at 1%, with sub-Saharan Africa at 1.6% contraction. Next slide. As a consequence, you've seen most of the world economies coming out with massive fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus. The United States has done a $2.9 trillion fiscal stimulus, including direct transfers to unemployed people, coronavirus and support to many states. In the Eurozone, you have over 1 trillion euros with $540 billion of fiscal stimulus and another $750 billion in asset purchases through the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. In the UK has not been left out. They've done 50 billion pounds in supporting the economy, and they're buying assets of around 200 billion pounds with another 330 billion pounds to loans to small businesses and guarantees. Japan, over 117 trillion yen in emergency packages. China does the same impact, but to a much lesser extent. And so similarly, you see the same in South Korea. Next slide. The emerging countries have not been left out. Sorry, you need to skip back one, please.
Okay.
With Nigeria, holding its own $1.4 billion of support into the healthcare sector and households. Fuel prices have been cut, and another 3.6 trillion naira of street stimulus has been announced. You've also seen similar responses for South Africa, Ghana, Egypt, and Kenya. And so you can then realize that the impact of COVID-19 has really gone all over the world. It's the little virus that we were watching on television between November, December, in January this year, thinking of it as some remote problem in China, has now sort of, held everyone down. And to the point that we are holding this webinar on Zoom, and we're delighted to have so many hundreds of attendees, but that is the new normal of what life has become. Next slide. As a consequence of coronavirus, but also other things playing out, with the world under lockdown and a lot of demand taken out of the system, plus the sort of price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, we've seen a massive correction in oil and gas prices. What was trending around, $60 levels about, a year ago, you've seen oil prices collapse to just over $20. Same thing has happened to the gas prices. For Nigeria, this is relevant because we are an oil-dependent country. Even our non-oil exports have been affected. You see the price correction as well, if you just look at coal and cocoa. And these are indications of the challenges the economy will be facing in 2020 and beyond. And it's quite likely that this correction will not reverse itself because it will then depend on how quickly the world economy recovers, and same for Nigeria and the rest of Africa. Next slide. And so when you compare the calamity of COVID-19 to what happened about 10 years ago during the global financial crisis, you know, obviously our economy somewhat is supported by the impact of international investors, both those, particularly those who are what we call foreign portfolio investors. During the global financial crisis, we saw a total of about $25 billion leave emerging economies within a matter of months. In this case, 90 days, as the impact, you know, began to grow. You've then seen here in 2020 alone, over nearly 3 times, actually more than 3 times outflow of investments in a much shorter period of time. So at the same time that we need the foreign exchange to support our economies because of the challenges of COVID-19, is also the same time the foreign investors are running for safer havens, you know, because they recognize that, you know, we're going to be in difficulty. So this is going to be a very trying time for many economies in emerging markets, not least of which, obviously, Nigeria is one of the key ones within sub-Saharan Africa. Next section. And so let me talk about the implications of this for the Nigerian economy. Next slide. If you think about the economic impact of COVID-19, clearly it's weakened our external conditions. You know, oil prices are lower remittances, you know, which, you know, our brothers and sisters in diaspora are also going to be impacted. Capital flight, like I mentioned, and of course, the exchange rate has been pressured. You already can see the signs if you're a keen observer, because the CBN has now moved the official rate from 305 to 360, while the INE window has been moved from 360 to 383. But that's not the full picture. The full picture is even more severe because if you look at the parallel market, I know that people are, you know, the cash market is already around 450 level, and there are many companies looking for dollars to continue their business. So the weak external conditions has led to deteriorating fiscal conditions because, of course, we'll have weaker revenues. Non-oil revenue will also go down because if companies are affected, their taxation capacity will be affected. We'll then have to go to higher borrowings to support our planned budget, and the debt sustainability will be pressured. This has also led to, obviously, with lockdowns and self-isolation and all the measures we've taken to manage COVID-19, output has been severely affected, lower labor productivity. Companies have been shut down because, you know, for, you know, one reason or the other, the government has decided to shut them down because of the pandemic. Households and schools and all of those have been affected. So there's, you know, we're kind of obviously walking through towards more economic misery, weaker economic growth, unemployment, and obviously consequentially higher consumer prices. Next slide. If you take it back to the budget, you recall that this year's budget was set with some lofty ambitions. Oil production was set at 2.2 million barrels, exchange rate at 305, and a benchmark oil price of $57. All of those have been reversed. We've come down to production of 1.9 million barrels per day, exchange rate at 360, which has helped from a Naira point of view, but obviously oil price at $25. That has meant that if you look at the total expenditure plan for the year, we have gone from 10.6 trillion Naira pre-COVID-19 to now 10.5. So on the top line, it seems that there will be no change. But if you actually look at the revenue, and this is an important area I'd like you to focus on, the revenue projected, estimated for this government We had set it at 8.4 trillion naira. We've now revised it down to 5.6 trillion naira. And I want to revisit that number later. The planned capital expenditure, that is aside from recurrent expenditure, has gone from 2.8 trillion naira to 2.4 trillion naira, with the fiscal deficit moving up quite sharply from a regional 2.2 trillion naira to now 4.6 trillion naira. Next slide. But when you talk about our revenue, historically, Nigeria has always fallen quite behind the budgeted revenue. This is a profile of the last 4 years, 2016 to 2019. And in each year, you can see that the brown bar shows you what the actual revenue was against the budget of the government at the beginning of the year. So 2016, we had 2.9 against 3.9. If you move to 2019, the last year, we're at 4.1 trillion naira against 7 trillion naira budget. Now, if we're now coming into 2020 with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, with many companies struggling, many companies shut down, a lot of individuals stuck at home, and the government is projecting 5.6 trillion naira as a revenue target, I dare say that they will struggle to get to even half of that number. So our conservative estimate from Afriinvest is about 2.5 trillion naira for the year, which has severe consequences for the way the budget has been stacked up. Next slide. And this is sort of the profile of Nigeria's debt position. We've seen the total FGN debt grow from 15.7 trillion naira in 2016 to now 31 trillion at the end of 2019. With ways and means. Ways and means is the central bank lending money to the government at 8.7 trillion. That too has grown sharply itself. But if we now expect that the revenue shortfall will be quite significant, it won't be 5.6 as they are budgeted, but perhaps between 2.5 and 3, it means that the budget deficit will be actually higher. And if we're not able to fund the deficit, and by funding the deficit, when you have a shortfall, you either have to go and borrow the money from both the domestic market by issuing treasury bills or bonds, or international markets by raising money in the Eurobond market as was originally planned. Those will be difficult to do, particularly the international one. As a consequence, we would expect that the ways and means number 8.7 might rise sharply and be well over 10 trillion by the end of the year. And these have consequences for how we as individuals and as companies will be impacted by the economy through the course of the year. Keep going, next slide. And therefore, debt service, again, another factor to watch out for, will be high. As I mentioned that we were at 31 trillion naira of debt as at the end of 2019. And as a consequence, we spent about, based on our revenue of 4.1 trillion, we spent about 52% of that, just about 2 trillion naira on debt service. If we expect to now borrow quite significantly more in 2020, and on a revenue base that is much lower, and anything from 2.5 to 3 trillion, we're likely to be spending almost 80% of our money on debt service. And that's just the challenge. So the government effectively is somewhat boxed in the corner, and therefore will need external stimulus to survive. And luckily, we obviously have received the first batch, tranche of money from the World Bank and IMF, and other loans, other international loans are being planned to help bring that fiscal relief to the system. Next slide. Well, how will this all work out? In 2016, we had a recession and the economy contracted by 1.6%. Then we had a recovery in 2017, up 8.8%, and positive since then, 1.9% in 2018, 2.3% up in 2019. But in 2020, we are projecting another contraction, and that contraction could be as high as 3.4%, which would be more than double the economic recession we faced in 2016. This is our projection. Obviously, where we are today, we are sort of at the onset, and with the lockdown and all the safety measures imposed by COVID-19, many businesses have not come back to their full capacity, and we have not really begun to feel the full effect of what COVID-19 will bring onto the Nigerian economy. Next slide. But there's still some bright spots amidst all this dark clouds. Some sectors of the economy will do well, and some will be negatively impacted. Areas like crude oil, we've mentioned the price has corrected, so it's negative. Manufacturing, obviously, cement, negative. But you see places like agriculture, which should be moderate impact. Food is an essential commodity. Agriculture will be impacted because of the disruptions in the domestic supply chain. But I think that it will net be positive. Same with food, beverage, and tobacco. The more positive ones will be people like chemicals and pharmaceuticals, ICT, and healthcare and social services. You can see that we are relying much more on ICT to do business, such as what we are doing this morning on this platform. And so there are bright spots that will allow astute investors to kind of begin to think of how to weather the storm of what has come up in COVID-19 era. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Toyin to take us through the new normal and what we need to see, for, during 2020. Toyin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ike. It's been very fantastic listening to you. And I must say once again that it's a pleasure to be on this webinar. It's a great pleasure for Emerging Africa Capital to partner with Afriinvest West Africa to bring this much needed conversation to those who have kind job opportunities with. I want to go straight into my presentation, and I'm going to be sharing. So I will be sharing my slides, and so I'm just going to need a minute to go ahead and do that. Whilst I find my slides, I want to say that COVID-19 has really changed almost everything for almost everyone. So I'm sharing my screen now, and I do hope everybody can see. I will be glad if one of the panelists, if Ike can confirm to me when you can see my slideshow. I believe it's up now.
It's up now.
Fantastic. Okay. So COVID-19 has changed so many things for so many people. And I dare say globally and in recent history, and recent means the last 100 years, I doubt if there has been any single phenomenon that has had this degree of impact on the whole world. And it's what I call an end-to-end impact, because it's an impact that goes from our health to our personal lifestyles, to our businesses, and then to our community, and then to our national economies, and then to the world at large. The impact is massive. And as a result, we are seeing shifting patterns of behavior. We are seeing new bias. We are seeing financial implications that are making people to reprioritize their investments and their spending. And I'm going to be taking us through these slides on what does it mean now to live with COVID-19? What is the new normal? What will be the new normal for the world, for Africa, and specifically also for Nigeria? Crisis over the years has always been known to breed change. And I remember putting up a message a little while ago in which I said the only thing about crisis is that it never leaves you the same. It leaves its mark on you. And I dare say that COVID-19 is leaving its mark on people everywhere. Now, what are the types of changes that we see COVID-19 bringing our way? And to examine that, I'll start from what has happened historically. So, after the world wars, clearly there was a concession across the world that nations needed to cooperate, and that also funding needed to be made available for the recovery of the devastated parts of the world. And that's brought to bear the setting up, the establishment of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which were created to support countries and aid their recovery. Now, The last financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, the global financial crisis, also resulted in changes. And the changes were largely around regulation and tighter corporate governance rules, because the crisis was essentially put at the feet of diminished corporate governance and lapse corporate governance standards. And as a result, we had the Sarbanes-Oxley laws and all kinds of banking supervision rules. Now, what will COVID-19 bring in its wake? Post-COVID-19, we see a decentralized, socially distant world. We see a world in which everyone thinks twice before he gets up and initiates a physical meeting. Now, people have said that once there are vaccines and there is a cure, that perhaps we will forget all the newly learned habits and go back to our former ways. I think the truth is somewhere in between. It will be a half and half. There are some new habits that we have learned. Remember that it takes an average of 21 days to learn a new habit. So there are new habits that we have learned during this period that will stay with us for a long time, if not forever. There are compelling reasons why people will choose to behave differently. Apart from safety concerns, there are the sheer efficiencies that we have enjoyed as a result of the new way we're doing things. So what is the new way we're doing things? Countries and companies will seek to domesticate essential supplies and inputs, even though this may imply higher production costs. One of the impacts of COVID-19, and one of the earliest and probably most drastic impacts of COVID-19 was the disruption in global supply chains. So we had global companies that had critical aspects to their manufacturing, to their production value chain, located in other parts of the world, which supplies were simply cut off because of COVID-19. The world's particular dependence on supply chains from out of China was particularly exposed. And because China was the start and the epicenter of COVID-19 at inception, it immediately had impacts. Domestically for us in Nigeria, it impacted the pharmaceutical industry, and which relied on China for a lot of the supply of both the finished drugs and for those who are producing components. And it also impacted on manufacturing generally, and a lot of our factories simply could not produce. So I understand that the United States, Japan, and some other economies are now actively encouraging, incentivizing their domestic producers to relocate their supply chains out of China back into the US or to anywhere but China. So we are going to see backward integration, and this is one of the opportunities I think I see for businesses, an opportunity with government support and encouragement, with new policies to review the how you can backward integrate and so be less dependent on international sources for your supplies. Now, we are already seeing remote working. As Ike mentioned earlier, we're having this by Zoom. I know for a fact that Ike, Ada, and I, we are all doing this from home. I believe that I want to see your numbers, the numbers of participants. Okay, I'm not seeing that immediately, so I'll come back to that. But the last time I checked, we had about 390. I believe all of you, most of you, if we were to take another survey and say, you know, are you doing this from home or you're doing it from the office? I suspect that the majority of you, I wish I had thought of that. That would have been a nice survey to do. I suspect that the majority of you are participating from home. So companies have seen that employees can work from home and still be productive. In some cases, we are finding that people are even more productive. Yes, I see 362 participants now. In some cases, we're finding that people are even more productive working from home. So you find out that And there are significant cost efficiencies, both for the individual in terms of transportation costs, in terms of feeding, because you feed more affordably at home, and also for companies and organizations who are, going to need to pay less rent. Some of them are giving up part of the office space. They're going to need to pay less in terms of utility bills, in terms of transportation, for personnel. So everybody is seeing that remote working can work. It's an alternative, it's an option, and it's not just for safety, but it's also for efficiencies. And when you look at an economy like Nigeria, where a lot of man hours and a lot of economic value is lost in traffic every day, you have people commuting to work and spending sometimes 3 or more hours in traffic every day. Now, this is time gained and saved by simply working from home. So I think remote working offers win-win benefits for all sides, which will make it stay with us for a long time to come. Now, some of the impact on these, of course, will be on one side, commercial real estate, in terms of offices in particular, there will be lower demands. And of course, for residential real estate, it will be a favorable one, expected. Now, the third aspect of this that is very important is schooling from home. So we see homeschooling and online education becoming more popular because it simply offers value, convenience, and safety at the same time. And if you remember, online education is typically significantly less expensive than all forms of education. So for those who are in the education sector working with us, participating on this, we really think you need to work on your online options and alternatives, because right now people are doing it because they don't have a choice. We see a world in which more people will do it even when they do have a choice. Reopening the economy is indeed a massive natural experiment. Globally, I dare say there has never been a time when economies across the globe, or there hasn't been a time, at least in the last century, where economies across the globe have shut down as completely as we have seen in the last couple of months as a result of COVID-19. For Nigeria, I don't think anybody in living memory or anybody alive has memory of a time when our economy was shut down this completely. Obviously, reopening after this total shutdown is gonna be a significant undertaking. And there are so many considerations that we need to bring to bear. The first and the most obvious one, obviously, is that if we reopen precipitately without proper care, there is the risk of exaggerated or increased numbers of sufferers and deaths as well from COVID-19, if this is not properly managed. So far, as I said earlier, Nigeria and the rest of Africa has had, a fairly, I would almost say we've escaped lightly. And this is with due respect to all those who have lost loved ones, But as a nation and as a people and as a continent, we do seem to have gotten off relatively lightly. Now, if the process of reopening the economy is not handled well, then there is the risk of a reversal of the gains that we have made. Now, be that as it may, there is a strong, compelling case for reopening the economy because, as it has been pointed out, the economic impacts, the hunger, the poverty that has arisen as a result of the shutdown is simply unbearable for developing economies like ours, with over 40% of the economy believed to be living below poverty level. It is simply impossible for us to remain as we are without risking public unrest and without risking significant humanitarian crisis. Because of that, we do need to reopen. And what we are presenting before you today in this seminar or webinar are the opportunities that we see even as we begin to reopen the economy. Opportunities for governments, opportunities and government both at the federal and sub-sovereign level, opportunity for corporate entities and for individuals as we cautiously return to business, but business not as usual. So what will business not as usual be like? The first point I want to make is that technology will be the fulcrum for endless possibilities. Over the years, we have known, or we have had an idea of how impactful technology can be to our businesses and to our daily lives. We have, to different degrees, both personally and as businesses, made significant investments in technology, which we have, utilized. But I dare say most of us have utilized barely 10% of the capacity of the technology that was at our disposal. Now, this is the time when we stretch and we use all what is available, and then we look for more. So technology becomes a frontline and an essential plug for growth opportunities. It becomes a key distinction and a key point of differentiation. And I believe that the quality of your technology, it's always been like that, but to a much lower degree. Going forward, technology will make a difference between the winners and the losers, because I like to say that today we are not just using technology for our business, but all of us are now in the technology business. So the tech space is set to attract investments across the value chain at an unprecedented level across all types of businesses. We see higher demand for work from home and remote learning tools such as cloud and hosting services, IT hardware, equipment, laptops in particular, as opposed to desktops. Unfortunately, the age of the desktop, may just, have gone bye-bye. And of course, work from home furniture, light, adaptable furniture that everybody can use to work from home, which also means demand for office furniture may drop. Supply of IT talents has been estimated will attract $16 billion revenue. So where are the IT gigs? Where are the would-be gigs? Again, as we have said in the last decade at least, it is very important for our children to focus on STEM education, that is science, technology, engineering, and math, and for us to encourage the young ones to acquire tech skills. The one thing we need to remember is that when you have the kind of teeming population that Africa has, you have 1.2 billion people, you have a population that is over 60% comprised of youths, you have in Nigeria over 200 million, and you have the majority of these as young persons. One of the key ways we can address the challenge of unemployment for our youths and economic empowerment for the youths is to encourage them to acquire IT skills. Interestingly enough, that was the answer pre-COVID, and a new phrase has been coined, BC, before COVID. So that was the answer before COVID. It is 10 times more the answer after COVID. So incubator tech hubs for coding and application designs become very, very attractive. Tech training hubs to breed more remote software engineers, supply of remote software engineers. And let me tell you something else that post-COVID makes interesting, is the fact that because everybody's working remotely, I'm aware that Google, Twitter, and Facebook have all taken decisions for all their personnel to work remotely. The question then is, if I train, or the opportunity I see is, if I train, or my son trains to become an IT expert, he can work for any of these international companies from anywhere. So you're going to find that the rush for work permits and visas to move to Western nations so that you can get jobs and look for better opportunities, that may drop, because you can now take those jobs and work from practically anywhere in the world. So remote working has a lot of interesting opportunities. So software and application development, remote software development, software outsourcing, mobile application, there will be huge demands for this. Remember that digital technology, again, is at the heart of the transformation that we're all going to need to make to stay in business. So we are going to need to have skills in mobile application. Digitalization of our business model and e-commerce is now an imperative for everybody. How do I acquire my customers? First of all, how do I market my customers without going out? How do I acquire my customers without going out? How do I serve my customers without going out? How do I obtain post-service feedback from my customers without going out? My digital good footprints and your digital footprints are going to need to be extensive and end-to-end. So how we're going to do this, offline consumer goods stores will have to move online. I'm sure some of us have heard of the dilemma of one of the most popular high street chains in the UK, which prior to now, because they had loads of people coming in and out, they felt they had no need for an online option and e-commerce option. And I think that was Primark. Now they are finding that, as of the last time I checked, from the beginning of COVID-19, they had made 0 sales because the stores were locked. So data analytics. So whilst we know that, we will gradually reopen markets, but it's never going to be the same as before. So data analytics becomes very important, as well as tools to interpret, anticipate consumer behavior. And in some cases, I understand, as tools to even actually manipulate consumer behavior. I need to move to the next slide. Okay, cool. Where else? I'm good. Where else do we see the opportunities? Healthcare is an early winner post-COVID-19. Healthcare is a major winner. I would say if you ask me to pick the top 2 winners, it's clearly ICT and healthcare. Now, healthcare is a winner globally because this pandemic is a health pandemic. But it is also especially a winner in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, because of the massive gap in current healthcare infrastructure, massive gap in healthcare skills right now, massive gap in end-to-end infrastructure, equipment, drugs and supplies, human resource management, procurement, distribution and support services. There are huge shortages across this entire value chain. So we see significant opportunities. So if you are looking for where to invest, we have a very interesting list here. There will be increased demand for primary and specialist centers, equipment and PPE, drugs, the whole gamut, personal. And if you're looking for skills next to ICT for the next generation to major in, again, we're looking for skills in paramedics, first responders, pharmacists, the entire gamut. Opportunities, of course, in these areas will include for financing. And of course, you know that both our firms are in a good position to support you with this. Government itself is providing finances, dedicated funding for the sector, and incentives, tax incentives as well. There are opportunities in project management, legal services, software engineers and development, all forms of consulting for this space, education and training, funding and student loans, nurse education, software, and specifically telemedicine is also an area that is important. I know, for example, that my family has resorted to telemedicine in recent times. At Emerging Africa, we've made that available to all our staff, and it's working excellently. These are options that we did not focus on, but we're all having to zero on now. Now, who are the biggest losers? I hate to use that word, but you can see in our slide, we have put it in a very nice way, the late to winning party. It will be late indeed for some more than others. So cheap aviation and hospitality business valuations, and because they're going to be late winners. So yes, if you wanted to invest, you can probably get some of these assets. If where you have distressed players that are not feeling cash rich, in fact, that are distressed, this may be opportunities to pick up, but it will be a long wait for there to be health in these sectors. Aviation in particular, and we'll talk about it in a little while. Weak players are potential targets for acquisition. Poorly represented on the Nigeria Stock Exchange again, that is true. And there are few listed hospitality companies, but especially the aviation sector. So you have the empty hotels. We we're looking at 890 million naira contribution, dollar contribution to GDP. The aviation sector, IATA estimates these losses that we see on the screen for the aviation sector, which is significant, $990 million revenue, because this was previously contributing that much to the GDP. 125,400 jobs could be at risk, with 4.77 million passengers likely lost. The cinemas and amusement parks are also looking at over 5 million tourists or customers lost annually. So these are the hard to crack ones. And I believe that travel will never be the same again, especially business travel. So it's really been a pleasure to share the new normal. I hope it's not all sounded like bad news. I think we have also seen the areas where there are opportunities for savings, for efficiencies, for new investments, for new skills, for new jobs, and for global careers to be built. So I thank you. It's been a pleasure to share this. I believe before I hand over to Ike again, I'm supposed to take us through our first survey. Yes. So the first survey, it should be an interesting one, and we want all of you to participate, all the 381, 82, it's adding every minute, current participants to please participate. Please go ahead and click yes or no. Do you think Nigeria will slip into recession by the end of 2020? Everybody vote. Do you think Nigeria? Please look for the tab for survey and go for it. Do you think Nigeria will slip into recession by the end of 2020? Yes or no? And when we're through voting, I'm going to ask Ada to announce the results. I hope we're all doing it.
Yes, the answers are coming in really quickly.
Fantastic. So do you think Nigeria will slip into recession by the end of 2020? I thank you all for participating. The whole idea is to make this participatory. I want to assure you that towards the end of our presentations, there will also be time for Q&A, and then we can hear more from you all. So are we done?
Can I share my screen as I take over for the next presentation?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ike. Please go ahead.
Okay. Toyin has to stop sharing.
Okay.
Yep, okay. And I will have to find my presentation.
If you ask nicely, I can do it for you.
There it is.
There you go. Okay, so Ada, would you want to announce the results first before I start?
Okay, I can do that. So we have a landslide. The yeses have outweighed the noes by a very large margin. So people voted 84% that yes, that Nigeria will slip into recession by the end of 2020. And then we have 17% of individuals who voted that no, Nigeria will not slip into recession by the end of 2020. Thanks.
Thank you. So it's good to come back. It's always tough I have to follow Toyin Sonny in any presentation. Well, thank you, Toyin, for that very erudite treatise on the new normal for Nigeria. What I want to talk about now is the opportunities for government. I think one of the first things we recognize is that Nigeria is a major importer of a lot of things. And if we look at the critical items, food imports, $4.6 billion, capital goods imports, $16.8 billion, and then raw materials and the like, 415. Just three scenarios. And you see the concentration of where those come. Food imports, we get 27% from the Americas, we get 41% from Europe, and about 19% from Asia. When we look at capital goods, most of our capital goods, about 70% is coming from Asia, about 10% from the Americas, and about 18% from Europe. When it comes to raw material, again, most of our raw material is coming from Asia, 17% of that coming from Europe, and only 10% coming from Americas. What is clear from these three pie charts, when you look at the global map, is that we do very little with our continent in Africa. And I think that one of the first things Nigeria should change as it begins to look at the opportunities for growth out of COVID-19 is its disposition towards regional trade. We have sort of had a tepid response to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think that in light of the present circumstance, we should revisit that and see how to make Nigeria the main driver of that agreement so that we can broaden our capacity to support the continent and also create immense opportunity for Nigerian businesses. When you look at the Nigerian economy in more detail, we think that COVID-19 presents a unique opportunity for resetting the economy. And there are four imperatives I'm going to talk about. The first two are here. When you look at the fiscal imperatives, for years we make budgets and make revenue estimates that are not cast in reality. When I explained, for instance, the basic numbers of the 2020 budget and how we're here planning to do revenues of 5.6 trillion in a year where we're suffering from downturn and disruptions due to COVID-19. And yet in other years where the economy has had the best advantages, where everything has been normal, we have not gone beyond 4.1 trillion of revenues. So clearly our budgeting process needs to be anchored with greater reality. And that's something we ought to start doing. The ability to tell ourselves the truth with the data we have, and therefore we can then plan more efficiently. This is a good chance to remove the subsidies. It's nice that the fuel prices have been removed, but we've not seen what we expect to see, which is a movement towards going to the National Assembly and introducing the Petroleum Industry Bill, or some variation of it that works, that takes out the subsidy element completely from the law, and therefore creates the legal incentive structure for companies in the oil and gas sector to come in and invest in both the upstream, the downstream, the midstream, and other aspects of the oil and gas industry, and make that a truly Nigerian industry that all Nigerians can benefit from. But at the same time as removing subsidies, we also have to think of removing the leakages we have in our structure. Again, it goes back to the way we budget, because there are so many budget headings and parastatals that are just collecting cash items from the system, but actually doing very well, or in fact, even having a negative consequence on the economy. Spain has touched on healthcare, but I have to say that, in looking at the real capacity of Nigeria, we believe that our biggest resource is actually human capital. The population up in our projected 200 million, some people will say 180 million people, but that's really the biggest asset that we have. If we can focus on quality healthcare for Nigerians and quality education for all Nigerians, from kids all the way to university, and focusing on vocational training, including technology as vocational training, building the infrastructure that leads us to support a modernizing economy, then we'll be well on our way to getting the answers right. And this is critical, because if you think about the opportunities for working from home and the technology implications of today, having skilled manpower who are healthy creates a huge competitive advantage. And I'll come back to that when I talk about the digital ecosystem. And last but not the least is to expand the fiscal buffers to improve our resilience. For far too long, anytime we have a little bit of excess income, that should go perhaps into the excess crude account, our leaders have been quick to say, oh no, we're already in a tough time, let's spend all the money. But this is really a tough time, and you can see how unwise the decisions we made in the previous years have been. So this is the time I would actually urge that if we can build a new economy out of Nigeria, we should divert most of the oil and gas income into some savings account and do it like the way Norway has, where any income from oil and gas goes straight into their savings account, and the country focuses on surviving on actual productive endeavors. Now, when you look at the digital ecosystem, we need to create a digitized economy that automates governments and processes. You know, take the courts, for example. For many years, they refused to, or they were reluctant to, you know, go to automated digitized systems to process just the legal and justice system of Nigeria. Then COVID-19 came in, and they have now been forced to introduce some of that. And, you know, people that said it was impossible are now having to learn that you have to have a fallback. Indeed, you can actually make that the front line. And that is critical, not just in the legal, in the judiciary, but across all sectors of the economy. If we build well-trained, healthy manpower, we can establish an ecosystem that begins to attract global tech companies to come into Nigeria, incubate those talents, and use those talents to deliver services. Many companies have come into Nigeria, such as Andela, if you recall, that's set up in Lagos and have, you know, hundreds of young professionals that are training who are working and doing work for companies abroad. There's even a much greater need for that today, given the explosion of technology and the software skills needed to run the modern economy of today. And obviously, to support all of that would be to expand broadband penetration, reduce rights of way costs, and ease taxes on ICT. I still see a lot of state governments that are imposing hefty tariffs and bills to telecom companies coming to lay fiber in their cities, rather than doing it the other way and saying, look, let's have a plan and give you the right access, because as this fiber is coming in and going across from one city to town and village, it actually provides the bloodline, the backbone of the economy of the future. And many states should really change that law. Instead of taxing now, it to be actually more to encourage the ICT companies to come in. The next two sets of imperatives are human capital and industrialization. Like I mentioned, you know, human capital is what is our biggest, actually not the second biggest, our biggest export, because if you look at the remittances from Nigerians in diaspora in 2018 and 2019, actually eclipsed the amount to earn in oil. For sure, even though we see remittances falling down by about 15, 20% in 2020, it will certainly eclipse the amount we're going to earn from oil this year. So we have to do more. But rather than rely on Nigerians who are in diaspora to send money to Nigeria, there's more that can be done to train Nigerians in Nigeria to earn dollar revenue working for international companies from Nigeria. And technology can help us do that through education and healthcare services, and through also incentivizing private sector companies to come into those sectors. We cannot, there's no chance at all that we can get to educate every child in Nigeria through the traditional means of building brick and mortar classrooms. We have to use technology to reach people because for all sorts of reasons, it just cannot be, it's not just practical anymore. So we need to look at some of the best models. Edo State is an example where, you know, during the lockdown across the country, so at least one state I saw that primary school children of the poor as well as the rich could go to school because they were able to learn from home due to what the state government has been able to introduce. So we need to do more of those things and leverage technology to deliver services across the population. And last but not the least is industrialization. We will see that arising from COVID-19, many economies will say we probably have concentrated too much in the Far East, in China and in Asia, and they will look to see how to move and diversify their supply chains. So for Nigeria, for states that are in the coastal lines, there's a unique opportunity to build free trade zones near the coast and create and put them with equipment with world-class infrastructure, because that will attract international companies that want to come and use Nigeria and Nigerians to manufacture and use our base to redistribute across the world. Clearly, issues like social services, security, and safety of people's investment will need to be sorted out for this to work. But that takes it for granted that this is critical. And of course, by expanding the port infrastructure and making it much more efficient to process export as well as imports, this would lead, I think, to a competitive advantage for states who want to exploit that opportunity. And with respect to businesses, there are also key opportunities that businesses can follow. E-commerce is one. Every business will need to modify their strategy to use e-commerce to drive their model. Toyin had touched on Primark, the large retail company in the UK that refused to have an online shop. Now you can see what that has happened. But for lots of businesses that used to depend on physical interaction, they too would need to learn and relearn that business on how to make it work in the world of COVID-19. That would mean backward integration, domesticating the supply chain to make sure they have cheaper and easy access to input, and import diversification where those opportunities arise. In the healthcare space, we've spent a lot of time on that: telemedicine, research and development, healthcare infrastructure, manufacturing of PPEs, and obviously facilitating the value chain in healthcare. Logistics will also be a big winner, investing in warehouse, trucks, motorcycles to facilitate storage and delivery services. And of course, energy, investment in off-grid solutions, modular solar power systems that can support working from home, given how epileptic our power supply system is. When you then think of how businesses can win, those who have cash today should think of expanding and investing in competition where they believe there's room for growth in a post-COVID-19 world. But at the same time, they should manage that cash prudently, because we don't know how long this crisis will last. And I think that it's not going to go away even in 2020. We're going to have to live with it for some foreseeable future until a vaccine is produced. But there's also opportunity to pivot into new businesses. If you're a traditional fund manager like Afriinvest or Emerging Africa, there's a chance now that with technology, given that everybody's at home, you could pivot and do other things that also talk to your customer base, whether they are savings, looking for savings in products or looking for investment products, because all of it comes to just managing money. And the last but not the least, but to train and upskill your staff during this downtime and get them ready and equipped to take advantage of the imperatives that the new era has introduced for us. So once again, I'm going to hand over to Toyin to take us through to opportunities for individuals and investors. Thank you. Toyin, over to you.
Thank you very much for that very enlightening presentation. I found it very, very incisive and insightful as well. And I'm just going to go back again to share my slides. Ladies and gentlemen, just give me a minute to do that. Okay, I need Ike to stop sharing. Ike, can you stop sharing?
I think I've stopped sharing.
Yes, he has.
Uh-oh.
Go ahead.
Somehow. Okay, cool. Please just a minute while I figure out why I'm not able to share yet.
You want me to round the slides for you from here?
I guess that would be fine, but I think I'm about to do it now.
Okay, so Tony, okay, I just want to make this announcement before Tony, you go on with your slides. Please drop the questions in the Q&A box. I just want to stress that to the attendees, please. Please drop your question, because I see that you're actually putting it in the chat box. So please move your questions to the Q&A box. That will make it easier to screen them and ask. Thank you.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're back with me, and I want to take us through opportunities for individuals and investors. And I know that this is something that many of us have also been looking forward to. How can you, as an individual, win in a COVID-19 world? Obviously, the strategy, as they always say, is to follow the money. Follow the money trail from government and corporates. Acquire relevant skills to fill the talent demand gap from attractive sectors. And again, we'll look at these attractive sectors. Now, before I talk about that, following the money trail, of course, also includes the entire stimulus package that the government has laid out, and which Ike has already taken us through. Opportunities to source funding for your business and incentives that are available as well. Now, the essence of digital services post-COVID-19 obviously would include gathering and analyzing health data. Now, this supplying and providing this kind of information is an opportunity for you. Solutions to simplify data and disseminate information is very important. Like we have said before, data analytics becomes of critical value when you have to source your markets remotely. The use of artificial intelligence, machine learning to retrieve knowledge on the virus is important as well in the healthcare sector, and of course in all our businesses. Now, the relevant skills you should develop would include structured query language, SQL, data visualization, machine learning, data modeling and evaluation, software engineering, and system design. They open up a huge plethora of opportunities, for our graduates and young persons. Target sectors and markets. We cannot overemphasize the healthcare and pharmaceutical sector. Financial services will remain relevant. Businesses need to restructure their funding exposures. And of course, we are available to guide you in that space. So financial services become important to learn to get proper cash management, to get restructuring of your obligations, and to also ensure that your capital structure is optimized for the type of business you are in and for the type of cash flows that we're going to begin to see in the COVID-19 world. Obviously, the government will require consulting support. The government will require also support with capital raising, communications and media solutions. Communication, the world. We were already in the communication age. In the COVID-19 world, we're in a triple communication age, if I can say so. Trade and e-commerce have become compelling. E-commerce as a mode of trade has become compelling, from agribusiness to food supplies to telemedicine, like I've said, to e-commerce to almost everything, household goods, supplies. E-commerce becomes very attractive, and of course brings up also the implications in the logistic business as well. Manufacturing, we have to, based on the recommendations that Ike has made, manufacturing obviously needs to be optimized and increased, also because we will be less dependent. We will be looking to be less dependent on international sources. And with what is happening with our currency rates and the outlook for it, we must think local and we must buy local. So design of mobile apps is also an opportunity, and these are initiatives and business ideas. Dashboard for outbreak analytics, design of virtual healthcare solutions, design of Nigerian-based online learning platforms. Very critical. Oops. Now, investing in Nigeria equities. Valuations are cheap and at the lowest in more than a decade. So you have statistics there for you from 2015 to 2016, all the way through to 2020. And you can see in that graph to my left that clearly valuations are at their lowest at 6.4 times from 2015. The one thing that I will like to say is that, and this is positive news, is that in point of fact, even though valuations are their lowest, you can see the difference between 2019 and 2020. The stock market has not performed as poorly as everybody thought it would perform at the beginning of COVID-19, and as poorly as it performed in the month of February, when we had almost 2 trillion naira loss in a 3-week period. The market has gradually firmed up. And it's also another signal that the Nigerian, our market may be more resilient than we thought it was. And a lot of these underlying businesses that still dominate our markets, financial services, and also some of these conglomerates that have been providing all the politics and the food that we have all been consuming, they continue to post decent results, and that has helped to hold up the market. Be that as it may, the prices are still at a 6-year all-time low, which means it is definitely an opportunity for investors to take positions, especially investors with long-term investment on their horizon. And bearing in mind that you're looking for investments that can give you a return in excess of the inflation rate, which is still double digit at about 12.3%. Investors can increase their exposure to quality corporate blue chip stocks, definitely, especially in sectors that we regard as defensive and counter-cyclical. So these are sectors, the defensive sectors are sectors that remain standing even when the market is going down. And the counter-cyclical stocks are the ones that actually do better when everybody is not doing well. So you have agriculture and food and beverage as defensive stocks, and you have consumer goods. And in this environment where we are, we have the ICT, pharmaceuticals, and health actually booming whilst others are going down. What are the additional opportunities for investors? In the fixed income market as well, we expect the yield curve to move upwards as the federal government increases domestic borrowing to finance its deficit. Total new domestic borrowing could be at least 2.5 trillion naira. So this again will become an opportunity for investors to earn good yields. The real return on investment is negative locally as the yield curve is now below inflation rate, which is the point I made earlier, and which is a point that, and I suspect that that may also be partly responsible for the increased activity that we're seeing in the equity market, because investors are looking for real returns, and real return is the return in excess of the inflation rate. But the yield environment is likely to change moving forward, at least post-COVID-19. So opportunities exist in sovereign bonds and also corporate bonds. Investing in Nigeria, still on the fixed income, the yield environment in 2020 is more attractive than during the economic recession of 2016. So that is another reason for us to look at this sector. And it creates the opportunity for debt restructuring and for long-term capital raise for corporates, which is one of the lines of business our two houses provide. Building a recession-proof portfolio, therefore, for you will be a portfolio that will be an amalgamation of these recommended range of asset classes. We strongly recommend the Eurobonds and the Eurobond funds because they give you the dual benefit of having your investment denominated in hard currency, so to speak, which is US dollars. And at the same time, because the underlying securities are based on Nigerian issuers, where the yields are much more attractive than you find in the Western world. That is why the Eurobonds and the Eurobond funds and dollar funds continue to be attractive. Now, obviously, the mutual funds are actively managed mutual funds, especially dollar funds, remain our recommendation because fund managers, being professionals, and we do have fund management business in both our businesses, are able to spot the opportunities that we have outlined and ensure that these funds are deployed accordingly, and funds that are entering the market at a time when the market is depressed like this provide you an opportunity also for an upward movement. So based on the expectations, domestic bonds also based on the expectations that yields will rise as the government seeks to fund its deficit, as corporates are also revisiting the market, and sovereigns as well. It becomes an opportunity to pick up good returns, Naira assets that are attractive. Equities, we have discussed equities. We advise investing in resilient companies with net Forex assets. So one of the challenges with companies and even some of the financial institutions would be those who are carrying net negative dollar positions or foreign exchange positions. So that's one of the things you want to look at. But the equities of companies that have reserves in US dollars will be very attractive. Opportunities along the agricultural value chain through crowdfunding will also be interesting. We see an opportunity for better structuring and less fragmentation in the agribusiness space will make for opportunities for investors.
Tony, you have about 2 more minutes, please, so that we can take the question.
Cool. That's cool. I think I have 1 or 2 more slides, and that's all. So portfolio, so we recommend to achieve resilience amid the downturns, a diversified portfolio with a range of instruments we have discussed. Hedging devices, businesses with FX liabilities must adopt hedging strategies. Exposure to FX is also required to protect value. So FX, holding FX in your portfolio and hedging your FX liabilities will be very important, and building buffers. It's important to build cash. Cash is a defense any day, especially in a market like this, a defense against missing your obligations, and also a defense against running out of cash, and of course, an opportunity for you to take investment positions when they do arise. When you are in a market like this, cash, as they say, is king. I want to thank you all. It's been great presenting these slides to you. And I'm handing over to Ada, I believe, for the next survey and the Q&A. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant.
Thank you so much, Tony. So we have a second poll, and then we'll take the Q&A. So please, let's get right into it. So the question is, how effective would you rate the responses from African governments to combat the COVID-19 pandemic? Adequate or inadequate? So we'll just give you half a minute to get your votes in, and then we'll share the results, and then we'll move right into the Q&A. Okay. We're going to have another landslide response from what I see. Okay, so 3 seconds more. And we're done. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just share the results. So the question was, how effective would you rate the responses from African governments to combat the COVID-19 pandemic? Now, 25% of you said adequate, while 75% of you said inadequate. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. Okay. So we have several questions here. Oh my goodness, I really don't know how we'll be able to get through all of them. But what I can say is that we have people from all over Africa and even people from the UK that have sent in their questions, which is really awesome. We're so pleased with the reach of our webinar today. So I'd like to ask a question, Olumide Lala. And he said, his question is, in view of the cross-border opportunities that COVID-19 presents, how can Nigerian manufacturers take advantage of these opportunities without consistent power supply, high cost of energy, and a technically skilled labor force? And then the B part of that question is, how should government policies change to enable these opportunities? Ike, would you like to sink your teeth into this one?
Yes, thank you. I think that if you look at the size of Nigeria, just from the size of the economy and the size of the population, even with our inadequate infrastructure, we can still outperform and take advantage of these opportunities. But as I mentioned in my presentation, COVID-19 presents an opportunity for government to start now to reset the economy. Many companies have learned to work without depending on public infrastructure like electricity or water supply or sewage disposal. And those companies are still here and they are ready. And I think that the biggest challenge for Nigerians to take advantage, Nigerian companies take advantage of business outside of Nigeria in the sub-region and across sub-Saharan Africa is really more to do with the bureaucracy around export and import. And that's something that is totally within our control and is really a human issue rather than an infrastructural issue. If we can organize ourselves more efficiently, ease those bottlenecks, and I think that Nigerian companies can begin to benefit because we do have more numbers in terms of people. Nigerians are more, I'm proud to say, a bit more hardworking because they're used to tougher conditions and therefore have to survive. Nothing against my African brothers, but to say that if you put a Nigerian in a similar condition like they have, they'll probably just excel just as well. So there are quite opportunities that we can take advantage of, despite the weaker infrastructural advantages that we have relative to them.
All right, thanks, Ike.
Was there a question to that?
Oh gosh, I've actually moved on. No, you said how should government policy change to enable these opportunities? I think that was
I think I covered that. Yes, go on.
I think so. I think so too. Okay, so I've got one here for Toyin. So Irene Olasende would like to know that considering the fact that people can now work remotely irrespective of where they live, so she would like to know if we can really expect a boom in residential property post COVID-19.
Okay, so Irene, thank you for that. I am hesitant to use the word a boom because one of the impacts of COVID-19, and as most of us have said, is that we're expecting a general recession. So in a general recession, purchasing power becomes a challenge. And so it would be stretching it to say there was a boom, but what I can say is what we lose in office resident office real estate maybe, or commercial real estate may become a gain, a slight gain to residential real estate. But people are not, I mean, everybody invariably is already resident somewhere. So it's not likely that we're going to go on a buying spree for houses and homes just because we're not working in the office. And especially at a time when there's a downturn and people are trying to conserve cash. What I will say though is that, and this may actually be adverse rather than positive, is that for commercial, for residential real estate that has relied on proximity to the business centers as a basis for rising prices. So people want to live in Ikoyi, Victoria Island and Lagos Island because they want to be close to their offices. Now, when people are working from home and they can stay in Ogun State and work and they can stay in the outskirts of Lagos, we're going to find that those pieces of residential real estate may actually be less compelling or less attractive as they were in a time when everybody was just so globally there could actually be some level of adverse impact in residential real estate. So it's probably going to balance itself out. That's what I think.
Thank you, Toyin. Okay, so Samuel Lotichuku, and his question is, in view of the effect of COVID-19, how do you advise people already in the sectors heavily affected and possibly have even lost their jobs to integrate into these fields that are flourishing now, especially given the fact that they may have acquired a wealth of experience and may find it difficult transitioning because of the lack of skills required in this new field? Ike, would you like to tackle this one?
Yes, I can give an example. There's a gym I go to in Oniru, which has been affected by COVID-19 because Lagos State ordered all the gyms to close along with event centers. But what they have done is to start online classes, right? In the time of the shutdown, of the lockdown, they have changed their website. They have introduced online registration So waiting for when they'll be allowed to open so that members can register online. And if instead of taking 50 people at once, they can take up to maybe 20 people and everybody must register to come in. They have online classes. They're about to acquire a Zoom license so they can, do online and broadcast on Zoom. They've also introduced merchandising. So they sell gym wear and fitness equipment. You can see how, they say necessity is the mother of invention. So they've spent the time of the lockdown thinking, okay, how am I going to survive as a fitness company, rather than, biting their fingers and saying, oh my God, this is the end of the world. So many people are becoming more creative in that regard. Even restaurants that perhaps do not have an outdoor seating recognize that, if we can serve people outdoors, it's, there's less opportunity for contamination than if they are indoors. So some people have gone to their backyard to open up a beer garden that they can add on, waiting for the time when customers can come back in. So most patrons might prefer to sit outdoors if the weather is nice and know that they are at less risk of being infected. So there are really creative ways you can think about it. I saw one event company on Channels TV recently who was taking the time of the lockdown to retrain their entire staff on etiquette and service, and planning that when they start up again in, catering for big parties and events, they will not have waiters carrying food to people, but rather people come into a very hygienic buffet table and be served at that point with waiters who are wearing gloves and who have understood the importance of personal hygiene as well. So I'm thinking through about the distancing and separation between tables. So you can see that even some of those who have been most affected have taken the time now to think through of what will the new normal be. So there are different ways you can really tweak that to succeed.
Thank you, Ike. That was wonderful. Andrew Ojoko, his question is, what's the outlook for M&A activity given the dire operating environment? Sorry, I think this is right up your alley. Could you share some insights regarding this, please?
So the outlook for M&A activity is half and half. So first of all is that where businesses are distressed and the currency is headed downwards, the businesses become ideally prime targets for acquisition by aggressive and cash-rich competitors, and possibly even international entrants who are seeing the depression in currency values as something that makes it attractive. But where the economy itself is in recession and the outlook for the performance of these businesses that they acquire in the medium to long term remains uncertain, they might want to first play a wait and see game. Now, they would be acquired, the target companies are also not comfortable with the kind of valuations that will come out in an environment like this. So they will not sell unless they are really compelled to or pushed. And where we can see the equity market, like I said, has not really gone the performance has not been as bad as we thought it would. The inclination would be, look, let's hold on as long as we have cash. So cash pressures will drive some of these activities. We may see consolidation in the financial sector. That's one area where there might be, because this may be regulator induced. There are hints and suggestions that this may begin to happen again, because the regulators would naturally want higher capital capacity for these institutions. So those are my thoughts around it. I don't know if Ike wants to weigh in.
I'm fine with your answer. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks. Okay, Ike, this last question is for you. Now, Ogochukwu Odum would like to know, oh, I'm sorry, I think I clicked on the wrong one. Just give me a minute, please. So the questions keep coming in and then they then keep pushing the other questions underneath. So yes, I'll just get it now. Aha. So in view of the, Joe Mekilua would like to know, that what do we think will be the future, the nature of the curve of the recovery in Nigeria?
Nature of the curve of the recovery in Nigeria.
Nigeria, yeah.
Let me start by saying that I was one of the people that clicked on the response by African government to COVID-19 as inadequate. And inadequate from a different perspective. I think that unlike the Western industrialized economies, Africa already had, Nigeria and many African countries already have massive healthcare problems, massive human capital problems that have yet to be solved. I mean, we lose something like 1 million children a year in Nigeria under age 5 due to malnutrition and a lot of curable diseases like malaria, typhoid, tuberculosis, and the like. But malnutrition being the #1 problem. I would want to go into maternal mortality, where we lose about 150 to 170 pregnant women every day. And if you think about the totality of COVID deaths in Nigeria, which is just above between 200 and 300 or so, you then realize that we have made a lot of effort to respond to COVID-19. But meanwhile, we have a raging tornado burning in our backyard that we've ignored conveniently all this while. And that's because those kind of problems have often more affected the poorer and the weaker in the society rather than everybody. Because COVID-19 does not have a discrimination between rich and poor, you then see government making quote unquote adequate response. So when you then take that to when the recovery will come, I think that we should have been one of the countries that would have taken the initiative to say, we will live with COVID-19. Because shutting down the economy the way we have done has deprived millions of Nigerians of their means of livelihood. This is an economy where there are perhaps about 4 million people employed by government, and let's say the federal government system, and throw in another 4 million employed by the state government system in a population of 200 million. If you say that, let's say 30% of that are working age people, because we have about 60% of our people who are below 25, then you see that we have created a massive injustice onto the system. Yes, obviously, the flip side of it from a medical point of view, I'm not a doctor, is that perhaps if we had continued with our movement, we will have far more cases of COVID-19. But I actually feel that perhaps the statistics being shown to us are not all complete, because we don't even have the reporting systems and the mechanisms to pick up, the occurrences. So I think that we should ease the lockdown as quickly as possible in Nigeria and let people get back, because the biggest palliative you can give Nigerians is the opportunity for them to go and pursue their own means of livelihood. But we will have to adjust to the new normal and maintain, wear face masks and social distancing, perhaps avoid, we can't crowd up into a stadium or go to, those Owambe parties that Tony loves very much. But if we then do that, then we could perhaps see this economy rebounding by the end of third quarter, entering the fourth quarter. If we continue this sort of lockdowns that we're in now into the third quarter, then I tell you, we're in for a very serious issue. It will become a much more polarized and divided economy. Some companies are able to work from home, the likes of Afriinvest or Emerging Africa Capital. They can work from home and do their deals conveniently from the comfort of Toyin's study on my home here. But, I tell you, there are millions of people that have to step out to do anything, to earn a living. And the fact that we're not traveling, just the effort of traveling from Lagos to Abuja and back, you don't realize as a business executive how many other livelihoods have been impacted, along that chain of supply. The fuel attendant that sold fuel to your driver that, drove the car, the person at the airport that processed your boarding pass, you enter the flight attendant, the captain of the plane, the aircraft, the airline business, you land, you drive to Abuja, you get into the Hilton Hotel. All of those services are completely disrupted because we're social distancing. So the sooner we get out, I think the only palliative I want the government to give us is to say, go back to normal, and do that more quickly, because if I'm being cynical about data coming from what we've seen so far, I will probably guess that any number thrown out is probably 10 times as bad. And if it's 10 times as bad and we're still walking around, then perhaps we have to live with it. And this is the new normal. According to the way Toyin has explained, we just put on our mask, wear the shield if we have to, maintain social distancing, but must get back and get on our livelihoods.
Thank you so much, I think from the response, you kind of dovetailed into your final comments. So thank you. Toyin, please, can you give us your final comments in about 1.5 minutes, please? And I really, before you answer, sorry, ma'am, to interject. I just want to apologize to everyone whose questions we've not been able to take. We far exceeded the time that we set for this webinar, but please stay tuned because like I did say at the beginning of this session, this is a very first edition and we'll be doing this on a monthly basis. So please, I hope we'll be able to get back, be able to answer your questions in subsequent sessions. Thank you. Toyin, please go right ahead with your final comments.
So my final comments are that COVID-19 is a wake-up call for all of us to recognize the fact that if you don't disrupt the way you do things, it is inevitable at some point or the other that you will be disrupted. And so going forward, we all as businesses and individuals need to be on our toes and just keep reinventing ourselves. Innovation is what is going to get us out of this crisis. Within your teams, in your organizations, in your families, set up think tanks, sit down together and strategize. Take time to go over these slides, look at some of the opportunities. You'll be surprised at what you can still do. One thing I will tell you is that some people are still smiling all the way to the bank, even in the midst of all this adversity. You could be one of them.
Thank you very much, Toyin. So I want to thank everyone for being a part of this wonderful session today. I want to thank my able panelists. Ike and Toyin, you both done justice to the topic today. And the tone basically was all about staying positive. That even though it's not all doom and gloom, I think that's what the key takeaway for every one of us today. It's not all doom and gloom. There's still bright spots that exist. There's still opportunities even to excel in our various areas of expertise and business enterprises and all of that. So I just want us all to stay upbeat even as the economy reopens. I know a lot of us can't wait to get back out there, but please exercise caution. Wear your face masks, your windshields if you need to. So please stay safe out there. Thank you so much for being a part of this session. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for all your comments. We've taken them all on board, and we promise we'll get better even as we go along. So do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Bye, Ike. Bye, Toyin.
Bye-bye.